Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz, and this season we will be unpacking real trends, hot topics in the workplace around allyship and inclusion. Our goal is that each week you leave with tangible tools, information, practical strategies that you can take back to allies at your organization. Let's dig in to this week's topic. DEI backlash is real, but it's not going away. So you might be surprised to hear, despite what you might see in the news cycle, organizations are really doubling down. It's those that were never serious to begin with that might be abandoning it together because we know it's tied to the business results that people want. We know that 97% of companies have at least one DEI initiative, so 85% have a dedicated budget for DEI, and 82% of U.S. organizations are measuring the business impacts of DEI. Even 78% prioritize DEI more than the previous year, with 45% foreseeing increasing their DEI budget in the next financial year. So even with the backlash, the imperative hasn't changed. The U.S. is becoming more diverse. Businesses need to stay globally relevant. It's really a question of whether the acronym stays or is replaced as companies focus more on inclusion. Words like belonging are getting thrown around a lot more, but the work doesn't change. It takes senior leaders supporting DEI, standing up to the naysayers who are part of the backlash for DEI. And that's what makes it successful long term, especially when we have senior leadership stagnant on DEI. In most organizations, 70% plus are older white men. And it might be hard to surface these issues of inclusion. So rather than people being oversensitive to diversity issues, we need our white male allies to interrupt bias, to present a different viewpoint because they're heard differently because they are a part of the dominant group. And that's really what allyship is all about. When we encourage allyship at the highest level of organizations, especially for those with privilege, with power, and that's what enables the success of DEI long term. The backlash is really occurring because DEI efforts are succeeding. We're starting to see positive social change. And that's usually when you see a backlash, that when it is working. It's interesting. The SHRM, Society for Human Resources Management, their recent conference presented some data. And what they found is DEI programs are successful and they encourage hiring and promotion of underrepresented folks. They have diversity training that doesn't portray white individuals as the bad guys. They don't have individual suits from employees who lose their job or are denied a promotion or complain because they're replaced by somebody because of diversity goals. That's really problematic. And another thing you want to be careful of is that, shareholder or activist lawsuits targeting DEI policies, and these can happen by state government leaders. So depending on where you operate, just be really careful that you're not doing something that could attract legal attention. So the first concern, hiring quotas. These hiring quotas can help level the playing field for a historically marginalized group. They can also send a message that a company is committed that might be seen as discriminatory. So we don't want to set aside a certain number of positions for a certain group. We don't want to have quotas that create resentment amongst employees who feel they weren't hired based on their qualifications, but they were not hired because they didn't check a certain box. So be careful of quotas. That can attract not just negative social attention, but negative legal attention as well. The other concern, bad guy training. We don't want people to feel like bad people when they leave DEI training. Not that we don't want to be real, right? We got to be real about the hardships that people face, but shame is not a vehicle for social justice. When people leave feeling ashamed, they're less likely to take risks, ask questions, or challenge their assumptions, which is exactly what we need our allies to do. So let's stay away from the shame triggers. Let's be real without being harsh. Concern number 3, diversity tokenism. Promoting people solely based on their diversity carries potential risks. That could be the perception that people are unqualified. Tokenism, where people feel like they're used such as a token, not valued. Lack of meritocracy, where people think that it doesn't matter what I do, it's what identities I represent. The lack of long-term commitment, and that could hinder opportunities for growth for everyone in the organization. So this does not help to do that. Concern number 4 is the public education overstep. So we know the Supreme Court, with their ruling on affirmative action, which only affected higher ed, it's important, colleges, universities have to be careful not to discriminate against students or employees based on race, gender, religion, or other protected classes. So while they're not biasing those decisions based on those identities, so a really tight rope that you have to walk here. But make sure you're careful. You can look at legislation that's been passed in Utah, Florida, and Texas, and just be really mindful if you have a large percentage of your workforce or do a lot of business in those states. That overreach, that overstep can sometimes permeate the workplace as well. Thank you, listeners. Be better allies. DEI is not going away. Rest assured, it's how we talk about it and how we address the concerns that matters most. Thank you for listening to the Diversity Pivot podcast. My hope is that you walked away with a tangible tool, insight, or information that you can share with other allies on the journey. If you liked this week's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a tremendous amount to us. We'll be back next week with another hot topic.